Retro.
Hi, this is Fred Tatasciore, and you're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. The Force is strong with both of them.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
It's Monday, and that means we are continuing our rewatch of the Clone Wars. Actually, we're picking back up. We've had a couple weeks off from this. But at any rate, before we get back into the Clone Wars, Jay, you want to remind everybody what our social media contacts are?
Sure. You can get back in touch with us on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust.
All right. Digits is aligned. The signal's boosted to maximum output. The shield is down. We are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So we are taking a look at episode 14 from season 2 of the Clone Wars, which is called A Duchess of Mandalore. And this will be a full spoiler discussion. So here we go. Jay, you want to go ahead and give us the summary of the episode, please?
Absolutely. Duchess Satine arrives on Coruscant in hopes of convincing the Republic not to intervene in matters on Mandalore. After seeing evidence from one of Satine's advisors that calls for Republic intervention, the Senate votes to occupy Mandalore to oppose Death Watch. Meanwhile, Pre Vizsla and Count Dooku conspire to assassinate the Duchess on Coruscant so that when the Republic arrives, the Mandalorians will support Death Watch in opposing them. With some assistance from Obi-Wan Kenobi, Satine manages to find proof that demonstrates the evidence the Senate relied upon was doctored, and a Republic occupation of Mandalore is successfully avoided.
Yeah. So, as I was saying just a moment ago, it's been a few weeks since we've had an opportunity to talk about the Clone Wars because we recorded other stuff that we aired in the interim well in advance. We didn't know where we were going to be with the Clone Wars to do stuff at that point. But we left off in the middle of this Mandalorian arc from season 2. And when I sat down to watch this morning, prior to recording this, is like, oh yeah, this episode, for some reason, this is an episode that I don't actually see that often here. Mm-hmm. But while I was watching, I was like, oh, Jay's going to love this. She's going to absolutely love talking about that. Mm-hmm. So I'm being presumptuous, but what are your overall thoughts about this episode?
Oh, I hated it. No, I'm kidding. Of course you knew I was going to really love talking about this episode. But, it's true, though. This is kind of one of those episodes that's more of an interim sort of thing between, I don't want to say some of the bigger action sequences and whatnot, but I mean, it's definitely one that is a pivot point in everything that's going on. And we've got Padme involved with some of the things that are happening. And, obviously with Obi-Wan being right there in the thick of things and coming to the rescue, and Satine really facing a lot of things that are, in the past, she put her loyalties in certain places. And now a lot of those things are really being shattered for her in some ways. And so it's a great episode in that we're seeing again the machinations of Palpatine and the types of things that he's doing, what Count Dooku is doing, and who he's working with. And we even get a little cameo of Mon Mothma in this one.
Right. One of the things that was interesting to me is that as I was watching this, it took me a second to catch on to why everybody was doing everything that they were doing, why the Separatists were trying to engineer this thing with Death Watch, why they were so excited for the Republic to show up on Mandalore, because you would think they wouldn't want them there because this is a world that they're interested in. But the whole point was that by getting them there, they could energize sympathy for Death Watch and then therefore the Separatist movement, yada, yada, yada. Anyways, it took me a second to kind of put things together. And then I realized, as you just said, this is pivotal. I mean, we stray away from Mandalore like right after this episode for a little while. I think so anyways, in short order, at any rate. But we come back to it But it really is the conclusion of this episode that sets up other things that happen, choices that Brave Vizsla makes after he's dissatisfied with some of the things that Count Dooku and the Separatists are making, some of their decisions and what the actions they take, and why it is that he's so eager to throw with the likes of Maul later to make things happen. So it is an important episode, even when at first blush it's just kind of as much as I like it, I think they could have been a little bit more straightforward with explaining the whole plot of everything here, because, and we'll get into some discussion as we get through a discussion, and I can try and point some things out. I'll try to remember to here, but let's talk about the deal that Death Watch was making with the Separatists. So, as you're kind of alluded to in the summary here, Brave Vizsla wants to conquer Mandalore, and so he needs to attack the planet. The problem is that Count Dooku points out to him is that you don't have the will of the people. So even if you were to take control of Mandalore, you'd only be able to hold it for a day. And what we need is an unpopular occupation. And I'm like super paraphrasing at this point. And so the idea is if the Republic comes to Mandalore, then the Mandalorians will resent that. And if Death Watch shows up as the face of a liberating front, the people will support them, and that's how they can conquer the planet. And that's all good and well. But then it's like, and now we're going to send a Death Watch assassin to Coruscant to assassinate the Duchess.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense to you, that part of it?
Well, I think the whole thing is that, Count Dooku, of course, is using Pre Vizsla as a means to an end. And the whole thing is that it's just serving his broader strategic goals and providing this tactical advantage, but furthering a lot of long-term plans for just destabilizing the Republic in general. And so I think for him, it doesn't matter how it's done, but just that it's done. So, the fact that Death Watch is going after Satine, if you get caught, then it does look bad, that this is happening, because it kind of proves that, oh yeah, okay, they are the bad guys after all. But then again, it's just more of a means to an end, I think, than anything else. And I think that's one of the reasons why Dooku kind of backed Pre Vizsla in the first place. You know what I mean? Is that it's just it's just an exchange for engineering chaos, essentially.
I guess if I'm Count Dooku, I understand this plan, which is I want my people, or people that are on line with in charge of Mandalore. So that's Death Watch. Makes sense. Get the Republic there, make them unpopular, have the Mandalorians rise up against the Republic, and have Death Watch be the face of that. We've got control of this planet. It's another feather on our cap. Great for the Separatist movement. And then, of course, we got Sidious behind him, which is, again, this creates more chaos. This, an opportunity to extend the war, weaken the defenses of the galaxy so he can take over. I get all that part. But why not send Cad Bane after the Duchess here as opposed to Death Watch? I mean, send an assassin, send a bounty hunter. Why send Death Watch where, exactly as you just said, if your assassin gets caught, it's like, well, wait a minute, even assume the assassin had been successful and Obi-Wan was there and apprehended the assassin. Well, it's like, oh, you're already going to you're going to support Death Watch, the person who just assassinated your leader. That's such a huge risk and flaw of the plan. Whereas if you hire the likes of Cad Bane, he's a mercenary. It could have been anyone that hired him to do that. And so that just seemed kind of like an unnecessary risk to this entire plan.
Yeah, I can see that. I guess the way that I looked at it is that Dooku kind of avoids direct blame in a lot of ways, because he's using Death Watch as a proxy. So he can kind of have this plausible deniability kind of
Well,
thing.
sure.
You
But
know what
I
I
mean,
mean?
who's to say that assassin says, Pre Vizsla sent me here, and then they go capture Pre Vizsla, and Vizsla says, I was in league with Count Dooku.
True.
I mean,
There goes that whole thing.
but my thought is, Cad Bane is loyal to his employer. And if the employer says, this is secret, you can't tell, Cad Bane's not going to tell. Anyway, so putting that aside, Satine gets to the Senate and she's making her plea. to the public that, not to intervene, that they must remain neutral. This is everything that's going on with Death Watch is an internal matter for Mandalore. And she promotes her pacifism, that her people are pacifistic as well. But then Palpatine completely surprises her with a recording from Deputy Minister Jerec, who is calling for Republic intervention to help defeat Death Watch. And if the Republic does not intervene, then it's going to lead to a civil war on Mandalore, which leads for Masameda and Palpatine to basically schedule a Senate vote to decide whether or not the Republic is going to, they don't use these words, but Padme and Satine definitely do, occupy Mandalore here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What do you think about this? I mean, it's, on one hand, it's a shrewd move by Palpatine to sandbag Satine. Boy, it just curious me all the teens we have here. Palpatine, Satine. As I said that. But he sandbags her with this knowledge, with this evidence. It presents it. She's had no, honestly, but that didn't strike me as in particularly good faith. That, that's maybe something they should have recessed this hearing and pulled her into the office and said, this is what we've got on that. It, to me, it's like, and I'm a little surprised in this context, like nobody else picks up on this, that this is, I mean, they're presenting this as cold hard evidence. They don't know yet that this has been doctored, that this has been altered to give the message that they want. But if you really are talking about a valued ally, I really felt like the honorable thing to do, the very diplomatic thing to do, would have been for Palpatine and Masameda to give her this information in private and let her contact her people and have this discussion, as opposed to, sandbagging her with it in the middle of the Senate.
Oh yeah, he totally blindsided her with it. But I mean, of course, we know Palpatine is not admirable. And this is all part of, his broader scheme to, wrench more power into his own hands. Because obviously Mandalore at this point was trying to stay neutral. They were pacifist. Satine was trying to fight for that. But I agree. If this was in real life, I mean, that would not, I can't even imagine that would even stand. You know what I mean? And that would just be a terrible, terrible way to handle things. But by doing that, it put her on the spot. She was blindsided by it. She was shocked. She was saying, no, he's a trusted friend. And then, of course, Palpatine follows that up with, and she's like, I need to talk to him immediately. And he says, oh, sadly, he was assassinated this morning. Really? Come on. Like you said, this should have been definitely talked about and shared in private, not just for the entire Senate to hear.
Right. If they're going to schedule a vote for the next day, why couldn't they have given her time to, because it almost feels like she got off the ship and was thrown right in front of the Senate.
Oh yeah.
like they were all waiting for her there. I mean,
Right.
Even Padme, when she was pleading the case for Naboo during the Phantom Menace, got to meet with then Senator Palpatine to discuss a plan. But here she is, just kind of thrown to the wolves on all of this. And then poor Obi-Wan gets the brunt of her frustration right after that. He chose his words very poorly in that moment, but
he did, calling her hysterical.
Well, it's like, he says anyone in your case would be hysterical.
Right.
And she's like, hysterical? Well, why aren't you hysterical? Anyone who did this should be hysterical. And she just keeps throwing that word back in his face. And like I said, his choice of words were not the best, but he was there to be an ally. He was there to offer support.
Definitely.
And so, but that's also just kind of like part of the relationship. And he doesn't take any of this personally, to his credit.
And he even says, as your friend. And she's like, all right, well, as my friend.
And, she even says, like, she's reluctant to take the advice of someone that regularly resorts to violence. There, she keeps throwing that back in his face. We got to see that in the last couple episodes as well. And that was the Sophie's Choice that they were in the middle of when, what was the name of the senator in the last episode, was basically saying, I've got this bomb on board the ship unless one of you kills me. Which one's it going to be? You, Duchess Satine, and therefore prove yourself to be a hypocrite because you're going against your pacifist ways, or you, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're going to murder me and prove to be the violent, murdering type that Satine hates. And then, of course, Anakin showed up and stabbed him in the back. But now here we are again. It seemingly got past that, And now again, she's throwing this, that, the Jedi use lightsabers. They are engaged in violence frequently, right back at it. Now, she's not necessarily wrong. They aren't really a pacifist movement, but I'm not entirely certain that accusation was fair.
Oh, I know, and a lot of it, I'm sure, is just because she was so emotional, and who wouldn't be? I mean, everything that's transpiring, and then
Would you say
she's
hysterical?
yeah. No, maybe not hysterical. But, and then to make matters even worse, when all of this is happening and she's, trying to get away, and they are basically saying, "We need to have her killed," and she has to jump out of her speeder, and then her speeder crashes, and then by the time they get back, Padme's like, "Oh, yeah, and they already voted." What?
Right. She's having the meeting with Palpatine and Masameda at the time. And Palpatine's like, well, there's no evidence that it was tampered with. For all we know, it was just the speeder was faulty and this is a tragedy. But then Masameda, they totally play her in this moment.
Oh,
Or they're
yeah.
trying to anyway. So Masameda's like, I agree with the Duchess. And this just goes to show why we need to intervene
Mhm.
in this type of thing. And they've really put her in this awful position, which is, yeah, we can investigate it, but there's no evidence, so we're not going to. But if you're right, this just goes to prove our point on
Yeah.
this. And it's just like, I can only imagine being in that position and just like my mouth would be gaping open, like, what you set it up so that I cannot possibly convince you. You don't want to be convinced in this
Mhm.
situation. And then, as you said, Padme comes in and says, like, oh, yeah, the Senate just voted for this. And no one bothered to tell her. They
Right.
used her accident as an excuse to accelerate the vote without even telling her in this situation. She should have been in the room for that.
Oh, absolutely. 100%. And there were so many things that just, as we just said, just were completely against what should have been done in any other situation, any similar one.
Right. So she goes on, I don't want to say the run yet because nothing's happened, but she goes to get the evidence that she needs to show that the the communication from Jerec is inaccurate. She wants to find out what the real case is, and so she meets with another Mandalorian on the planet by the name of Davu Golek, and he hands over what will end up being the undoctored footage from Jarek's transmission that basically pledges support for Satine and that how Mandalore should remain neutral and the Republic should not intervene in all this. But then that Death Watch assassin kills him and starts trying to take her out as well. Why he went for Davu Gul at first, I'm not certain, because the person that has the influence is Satine. But at any rate, she manages to hand off the information to Obi-Wan at Coruscant Plaza. I forgot about this completely until rewatching this episode today, that this, which has been renamed to Monument Plaza and a lot more
Mhm.
current stuff, showed up in the Clone Wars at all.
Right. I know. I was the same way. I'm like, wait a second. Is this the same? Because as soon as I saw it, my mind went to Andor right away.
Mhm, mhm. Well, and then we got to see it in The Mandalorian as well.
Uh huh.
And then, of course, and to be more specific for everyone listening at home, the Monument Plaza is a plaza there in Coruscant that's built around Mount Umat, and the top of that mountain sticks out from in the middle of this plaza. It is the only place that you can get to the surface of Coruscant, and of course, security droids won't let you touch it or anything. I didn't realize that we actually saw this during the Return of the Jedi and the special edition scenes at the end when the Palpatine statue is pulled over. That's that plaza is in the foreground.
Oh, okay. I did not
Right
realize
there.
that.
Yeah. And so that's actually technically the first time we've seen it, but we got to see it in The Mandalorian when the Doctor goes there and he's kind of being set up. And then it is mentioned quite a few times in the High Republic as well. And then in Andor as well. So
Mhm.
this has shown up a number of times, but yes, the special edition was like the first time we saw the plaza. I don't know that you can see Umat there, but this, it was part of a Ralph McQuarrie painting, and then it was used in a source book back in the 90s. This is really like the first good look at it on screen, and then it comes up a number of times after that. That was kind of a fun discovery when during the rewatch.
Right. And then I realized too, I finally got to watch the featurette this time, in that Dave Filoni was talking about how he'd always wanted to use that concept art from Ralph McQuarrie,
Mhm.
and that George Lucas had given him his blessing for it. And so that's where the chase down happens. And I just think that it's so cool that, of course, Dave Filoni never put past him, coming up with these genius ideas that then become these iconic things in Star Wars.
Yeah. And the other thing that I found to be really cool about this while looking into it is that there is a boulder on the road to Lucasfilm Animation's Northern California headquarters that is the inspiration for the top of Mount Umad there.
That's cool.
Yeah, so they've done that. They take those real world references here. And for you trivia buffs at home, this is level 5216, where you can see Umad on Coruscant. That is like way high in
Yeah.
the atmosphere.
Yeah.
I'm surprised people can breathe up there, but there we
Right.
are.
Is there
So
any significance to that specific number? Because I know there's so many, numbers that are like 1138, for example, are so significant in Star Wars.
yeah, you're right. I mean, it seems like rarely is a number chosen by accident in Star Wars.
Mhm.
A little frustrating because I'm trying to look it up. My screen froze for a second.
Oh, no.
Um, yeah, according to Wikipedia, 5216 is just associated with this level. It doesn't seem to have any other references there. So if anyone else
Okay.
knows any, let us know. But
Yeah, sweet.
right, but yeah. So anyway, so they have their handoff there, and then they come up with their plan where Satine's going to turn herself in at the Senate steps so Obi-Wan can sneak in and pass off the evidence to Padme, which she does, and this leads to another hearing where the evidence comes out and the invasion of Mandalore gets called off based on that. But this is accompanied by a scene where Palpatine is now apologizing profusely to Scene. I, that did not come off at like sincere at all to me. But what did you think?
Oh, no, definitely not. I mean, it was so condescending in so
Yeah,
many ways.
yeah. I mean, I was watching that and I was like, is she buying this? I hope she's not buying this
Right.
because and that should be like a major red flag right there
Mhm.
because they were so determined to do it and so quickly that they just seized on anything and didn't give anyone an opportunity to investigate. I mean, when Naboo got invaded, again, I'm putting on this in the Phantom Menace, the Senate was convinced to, you know, rest and form a committee to go investigate Padme's allegations. And so maybe they've learned their lesson from then that, that they can't wait on the subject. So credit to them in that regards. But, you know, and that was the case where the monarch of Naboo was coming asking for support. Now you've got the leader of Mandalore coming in and saying, we don't want your support in
Right,
this
right.
situation. And so, you know, it was just everything was so hasty in that instant. And it just everyone in the Senate seemed to be blind to that fact. I mean, no one was saying that we're moving too fast. Maybe we should contact people on Mandalore and ask what's going on right now. I don't know. It just is it should have been a red flag.
Well, now that you put it in that way, it's making me think, because obviously Padme was so frustrated in the Phantom Menace when she said, I will not permit my people to suffer and die while you discuss our fate in a committee, kind of thing." So, as you said, maybe this is under the guise of, we're moving faster, we're doing things, so that that doesn't have to happen again, and we're acting in your best interest. And so, the senators may be looking at that in some ways as thinking that Palpatine is just looking out for Mandalore's best interests, and this is so wonderful that he's not wasting any time and he's jumping right in. So yeah, there's a huge contrast there.
Right. Yeah. It's not a perfect comparison because in the Phantom Menace, there was no galactic civil war between the Republic and the Separatists. This was,
Right.
it's the monarch of Naboo coming up and making allegations, and then there were people vehemently denying. The Trade Federation, was being accused of this, was denying it there in the Senate. But in this situation, the other big difference is that Satine is here saying, "I've got this under control. We can handle this." And there's no one alive there contradicting her. All they've got is they come to find out, a doctored piece of evidence saying that we need this intervention. And there is, legally speaking, a bit of hearsay. That's the problem in this situation. The statement from Minister Jerec is made outside of this proceeding. No one has the opportunity to ask him any questions. And the fact that he was killed in a bombing is good enough for them. There is some evidentiary exceptions that might apply to that if this were in court. But compare this to Satine, there's nobody else in the Senate that is contradicting her other than Palpatine, the leader of the Senate here. And she's actively saying, we don't need support. We don't need you to send everything. There's nobody here in the Senate that is being accused of anything. Death Watch is not part of the Senate in this situation. And so, it's like you said, I think we both pointed out at this point, it's not a perfect comparison, but it really, I guess, maybe you summarize this, it's the whims of whoever is actually in charge of the Senate. In the Phantom Menace, it was the bureaucracy, it was the special interests, it was the corruptness that was in there that Palpatine vowed to get rid of. And now here he is, the leader of the Senate, and this is what he wants, so he's making it happen.
And just manipulates it however he wants to.
Right. So this ends, one of the things that happens here at the end is that Vizsla goes to Count Dooku and he just starts yelling, this is unacceptable. He's still planning to attack Mandalore, and Dooku basically throws back in his face, you do this and you will fail. We have other means of accomplishing our goals, and we have other things in motion. So what makes me wonder, what exactly did Dooku and Palpatine have that was in motion? Because what ends up happening later is that Maul builds a criminal syndicate to help Death Watch take over Mandalore. And Maul's not in the picture right now.
That's so true.
So I don't think there's an answer to this, but I'm really curious what their alternative plan is, because the result's the same. The point is that eventually when Maul and the criminal syndicates help Death Watch there, Death Watch takes over the planet and kind of creates this other distraction where it draws in Jedi, which draws in Republic forces, which spreads armies thin, that allows Palpatine to achieve some of his goals. And then he goes to Mandalore, kills Savage Opress, spoiler for later in the series, and defeats Maul in that situation here. But I can't imagine that was the plan.
Well, the only thing that I can think of is there a more practical reason why he wanted to have Mandalore? And could it be, anything having to do with Beskar stores or where it is positioned in the galaxy just in general for trade routes, that type of thing? Or is it enough out of the way to have things like secret labs or whatever? You know what I mean?
Well, I think it's a bit more straightforward than that. I think it's simply, Mandalore is Mandalore here. It's Duchess Satine leads, what was it, something like 1,500 worlds that are trying to stay out of this war. And if they can bring Mandalore in on the side of the Separatists through Death Watch, that's a huge faction that they can bring with them. And, we see later, when the next times we see Satine, it's like there's corruption on Mandalore. People are they're buying poisoned food. And so that has nothing to do with any of this that's going on now. It's not until Maul gets his act together that Mandalore really comes into play as a component of this war, if I'm remembering correctly. And so, Beskar doesn't seem to be an interest. It's just it is a power move in this regard. But I just don't understand what this other plan that Count Dooku's alluding to that they have for taking over the planet. I mean, we know what happens. Like I said, Maul steps in, but he's not aligned with the Separatists in this situation.
Yeah, there's got to be something in a broader Sith agenda, that we are unaware of.
Yeah, so it looks like potentially Maul interfered with those plans unknowingly. So
interesting. I've never thought of it that way before.
Yeah. Well, that kind of gets us to the episode. Do you have any other thoughts before we wrap this up?
Satine and her stinking red cloak. Girl, you got to find a better way to hide in public. That was cringy. I'm not gonna lie.
You didn't like that one, huh?
She's like Little Red Riding Hood. But, I will say that, again, kind of referring to the featurette, that Dave Filoni was talking about the sound design in this particular episode. And I noticed that even before watching the featurette. I was like, wow, the sounds are just on point in this episode. And, of course, that's Matthew Wood and Dave. Is it a chord or a chord? But they are just absolute geniuses when it comes to sound design and how important sound is. And
Right.
even Dave was saying, watch the scene without the sound and then watch it with the sound, and you'll see how much layering it adds to it. And I just think that was so cool to say. And it's true. The sounds really do make a huge difference.
One of the things I love about those featurettes is that Dave Filoni has something he's remembered about every single one of these episodes that
Yeah.
makes that episode his favorite for some reason.
Mhm.
In this case, and then like you said, the sound design was one. He talked about how that was one of his favorites. What they were able to accomplish with the sound there. So yeah, good call out. All right. Well, then we're going to go ahead and wrap up this episode of Podcast Stardust. And thank you all for joining us for our discussion of this episode of the Clone Wars. We hope you've enjoyed it, and would invite you to subscribe to the podcast on your podcatcher of choice if you haven't done so already. And if you have done those things, we'd also ask you to consider potentially leaving us a rating review wherever those are supported on any podcatcher that you might use. Those are extremely helpful for driving the algorithms that helps the show get noticed by others. And if you want to find out more about the show and more of our past episodes beyond what's going to be on your podcatcher, head over to retrozapp.com. Our entire catalog of shows is set up there, going all the way back to episode 1 that came out in 2019. So it's been a while. Well, with those things in mind, Jay, you want to go ahead and remind everybody one more time what our social media contacts are and where else we can be found online?
Sure thing. We are very conveniently found on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. And if you're into Pinterest, you can check out all of our boards over there with everything Star Wars. And then, as Dennis mentioned, you can find us on all kinds of places, including YouTube and YouTube Music as well. So head over to both of those, like, subscribe, and even share those out. And we'd also love to hear your thoughts on this episode of Clone Wars or any others that you might have. And lastly, we do have a link on our show notes to TeePublic, and that will get you to a store where you can buy something of Podcast Stardust, 7 different show logo designs to be exact, and all kinds of things from t-shirts, sweatshirts, coffee mugs, even wall hangings and tote bags and everything in between. So once again, the link to that TeePublic store will be in our show notes.
All right. You want to give everyone an update on what's going on with cosplay?
Sure. So head over to Instagram where you can catch all of my cosplay adventures at j.snipscosplay. And right now, a little quiet on the cosplay front, but things will be firing up here come fall. And so you can catch Ahsoka, Hera, the Fourth Sister, my Mandalorian, and other things as well. So if you haven't had enough Mandalorians by listening to this episode, you can check out my cosplay on j.snipscosplay.
Okay. Coming up on the show this Wednesday, we are getting back into the High Republic with a look at the last young adult novel in the series called Into the Light by Claudia Gray. It's a good one, so make sure you stick around for that. And then on Friday, we get back into Star Wars news. So we're going to wrap up the week. So with all those things said, thanks for listening to episode 921 of Podcast Stars, everyone. Have a great week. And until next time, may the Force